Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're talking about the 2024 NFL Outlook on Ricky Pearsall. Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we'll be looking at the pre-draft profile, team analysis, schedule analysis, and his week-by-week matchups to see what the obstacles and opportunities await him in 2024. If you're new to the channel, new to the stuff that I do, you can check out the description below where you can get a glossary of terms, kind of learn more about him. But with all that stuff out of the way, let's get to the setup. So here's what the setup is. Ricky Pearsall was drafted by the 49ers at pick 31 in this year's draft. The typical expectation of the approximate value of a wide receiver selected at pick 31 since 1969 is 88.80 out of 100, meaning you're expected to get a player who's 88% better than the vast majority of NFL wide receivers when you take them at 31. But Ricky Pearsall's data score is lower than the expectation of his draft status. So his EAV, or expected approximate value score, which takes into account his entire pre-draft profile, is 67.06 out of 100. To explain the risks of Pearsall, let's dive into his pre-draft profile. So first off, let's take a look at offensive market share scores. This is a really great place to start because this is a big indication in terms of whether a guy's going to make it or not. It's just by looking at their offensive market share scores. When you take a look at the data here, 66.87 in terms of receiving market share, 76 percentile in terms of total offensive market share, and then 54 percentile in terms of touchdown market share. Taking a look at the All-Pro averages, Pro Bowl averages, and starter averages, Pearsall is nowhere near any of those averages, with the exception of total offensive market share. But this is the first place where there's a little bit of concern as to why his data score is as low as it is. Then when you get to efficiency takes a look at things like yards per touch and, of course, touchdowns per touch in terms of per snap basis production. Taking a look at Pearsall here, his touchdowns per touch, yards per reception, not anywhere near where you would want them to have. So he's not a very efficient wide receiver based on his college production, and he's not really a great wide receiver in terms of market share production either. So again, these are concerns. These are just legitimate concerns based on his data. Now, as an athlete, he did test well. So based on wide receiver athleticism, he had a great explosive lower body strength score of 79 percentile. Speed was 68 percentile and a 90 percentile flexibility score. So great in terms of his change of direction skills as a wide receiver based on athleticism traits. But there's a mismatch between his production and his athleticism that I think is something that's being overlooked. A lot of times people will give credit to wide receivers who test well in terms of athleticism while ignoring things from a production standpoint. I think Pearsall kind of falls victim to that a little bit in terms of his data. Then when you get to adjusted production takes a look at things like strength of schedule, strength of team, those types of things, and of course the strength of the age, the age of him as a prospect. This is an area where he did not do that well. His age score is 9.34 out of 100. His MSA rating is 65 percentile, and the 58.48 is the pass score. Pass takes a look at efficiency plus his overall market share traits. So looking at the starter averages, he's nowhere near the starter averages in terms of adjusted production, which is concerning. So he's a great athlete. He's a very good athlete. But his production is not really where you want it to be. And these are the risks. I'm not saying that Pearsall is going to be a bust just because I looked at a bunch of charts and told you that he's nowhere near what starters usually produce. What I'm telling you is a riskier prospect. The bet, when you put a bet on the betting table, he's a player that is going to have more of a risk, more of a chance of busting compared to other players. That's all I'm trying to say. When you get to what makes him a fantasy risk, it's simply this. The overall EAV, or data profile for Pearsall, is 67 percentile. Since 1969, wide receivers with a 79 or lower data score. So I included more wide receivers in terms of 79 or lower in this from picks 20 to 32 of the NFL draft are as follows. Calvin Ridley, Anthony Gonzalez, Matt Jones, Josh Dotson, O.J. McDuffie, Mike Quick, Willis Adams, Reggie Rembert, Haywood Jeffries, Vance Jordan, Johnson, excuse me, Kadarius Toney, Kelvin Benjamin, and John Ford. Those are all the wide receivers that tested like Pearsall, that went in a similar area of the first round. And those are all the wide receivers that tested like him and were in the first round. It's not a great list. It's just not. There are some success stories in here. Calvin Ridley, of course, had some success. Anthony Gonzalez, I don't know if you guys remember him or not, but of course he was catching passes for Peyton Manning at one point, and then he wasn't. Kadarius Toney, of course, is still trying to find his foot in the NFL. Kelvin Benjamin, of course, everybody knows Kelvin Benjamin's epic rise and then failure in the NFL. But with that list and additional wide receiver information, we can formulate year one potential based on the current roster. So let's take this information in and let's look at the roster to see if where he landed will help him out any as a prospect. And taking a look at the 49ers 2023 team analysis, the 49ers ended 2023 with one of the best offenses in the NFL. They ranked 95.91 out of 100 in terms of OSRS. So their offense was 95% better than all the NFL offenses since 1960. That's pretty impressive. Brock Purdy also had a QBR percentile score of 96.54 out of 100, meaning that he was 96.54% better than every quarterback in the NFL since 1960 in terms of QBR overall for the era. And this is era adjusted as well. So it's not just looking at them based on, it's not comparing QBR of a quarterback from the 1980s to a player in the 2000s. It's era adjusting, and then it's comparing those players after you adjust for the era that they played. Now, Brock Purdy continues to be a controversial quarterback for the 49ers, but his overall efficiency is elite, even if he doesn't pass the eye test of every evaluator. So I would say Purdy, or Pearsall, I should say, landed in a pretty good situation. He landed with one of the better or best quarterbacks realistically in the NFL in terms of passing efficiency on one of the best offenses in the NFL, at least from last year. Now, that doesn't, past performance does not always predict future performance, but that's a good thing to land in an offense that was really great, and now they're going into their second year in terms of, after coming off of that really big up. Now, in terms of the parameters here, so let's take a look at Pearsall compared to those other wide receivers. Pearsall's situation would be very similar to, say, Calvin Ridley and Anthony Johnson. Based on the parameters that were set forth, I looked at wide receivers selected again, and from picks 20 to 32, with a 79 or lower data score compared to the QBR of quarterback and OSRS, or offensive ranking. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to Pro Football Reference. Based on that data, I found that QB strength and offensive strength does not correlate to NFL wide receiver success. So this is pretty self-explanatory, but a lot of people kind of get sucked into this. But based on the data work that I've done, based on previous videos as well, there's no strong correlations for wide receiver success in the QBR or OSRS of the incumbent team, meaning just because a wide receiver goes to a team that has a great quarterback or has a great offense doesn't mean that that wide receiver automatically is going to be more successful than a player that went to a bad team with a bad quarterback. And this was regardless of data score. So regardless if you were testing poorly as a wide receiver or really great as a wide receiver, it doesn't matter where you land. There are other factors involved that determine whether or not you break out at the NFL level. There's other variables. There's other things that can affect things than just the team that you landed on. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is it's really not going to help Pearsall, the fact that you landed on the 49ers or not. It really is only going to matter if Pearsall is able to translate his ability from Florida to the NFL. That's all that's really going to matter. So Pearsall will either succeed or fail based on the variables other than the strength of his team. Okay. Now, one last thing before we get into some more data. Typically, one-year wide receivers based on the prior parameters set, so based on the parameters I set before, have 48 percentile in terms of NFL market share, and then you add a 10 percentile adjustment into year 2 or 3. So you would hope for Pearsall to have a massive rookie season in the NFL, but data suggests that's not the case for him. Most wide receivers who tested like Pearsall end up becoming average wide receivers for the most part. And again, that's where the riskiness comes in with a prospect like this. Now, in terms of the 49ers offense, the biggest thing that really sticks out here is he's not the most talented wide receiver here, based on data overall. So when you take a look at the quarterback, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Ricky Pearsall is probably the least talented player from a data perspective here compared to all of the skill position players. It's not the best situation. Offensive line wise, there's still issues here. The right tackle position for the 49ers is scary. Jake Brindle at center hasn't really developed exactly into what he needs to be. Aaron Banks, of course, is a little wishy washy. They drafted Ricky and Dominique Pooney, who may or may not start. There has been some people who have put uh, the former Miami, Florida, former Raider guard who's there, but kind of escapes my name. But he might be there. He's kind of a journeyman type guard, not the best, but not the worst. So offensive line wise, not the best. Skill position wise, great amount of skill position players here. But Pearsall is not the most talented amongst them, which is a concern. It just is in terms of that. For the schedule for the 49ers, it's not the easiest. So this is they have great offensive talent, skill position wise, but the offensive line isn't that great. And that's kind of what really lowers the 49ers offense this year on top of age of the roster. But when you look at the schedule for them in terms of the games where they have offensive advantages across the board, so comparing the skill talent to the other team skill talent to the offensive line to the defenses they're going to be facing, they don't have a lot of really great matchups this year. It's a much tougher schedule, and because of that, I think this is not the best situation for a rookie like Pearsall to really break out. I mean, there's going to be opportunities here, of course, but I think it's going to be a little rocky. I think the 49ers offense in general actually might be not as great as it was last year based on the schedule as well. So taking a look at the schedule, so week one, you have probably one of the better secondaries in the NFL in the New York Jets. Obviously not the situation you want to see, but Michael Carter II is probably going to be somebody that Ricky Pearsall is going to have a matchup on. So we'll see what happens, but this could be a good game for Ricky Pearsall based on that individual matchup here, where they might be able to take advantage of things here, but we'll see. Then, of course, you get to week two in terms of the Minnesota Vikings. They revamped their entire defense with a lot of players that really haven't had solid outings just yet. We're going to be monitoring this situation as well, but I think there's some opportunities here for Pearsall to take advantage of some things. Then we get to week three with the Los Angeles Rams. They revamped their front four in terms of Jared Verse and Brandon Fisk as rookies. So we don't really know a whole lot of what that's really going to look like, if they're really going to translate or not. Based on data, Braden Fisk looks like he might translate a little bit better than Jared Verse. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens because the Los Angeles Rams are a bit of an enigma right now in terms of what they have. They have a lot of interesting talent, but they haven't quite put it all together yet. And I just want to see kind of what they do this year to kind of see what happens. But this might be a good game for the 49ers. It might not. We'll just have to see. Then, of course, we get to the Patriots here. Their secondary hasn't really established itself just yet. I know Christian Gonzalez is a really talented player from a data perspective, but hasn't really put it all together yet. He had some flashes last year, but hasn't had a full season, a really solid start. So we'll see what happens, but this is an opportunity for them to do well against a struggling Patriots team because of a rookie quarterback and because they just have been struggling offensively for a while now. Then, of course, you get the Arizona Cardinals. They have a revamped defense in many ways with Max Melton and Darius Robinson. The offense for the Cardinals is also going to be improved in terms of additional running back and wide receiver talent that they added and offensive line talent. So this could be this could be an interesting game. This is going to determine kind of who might win the NFC West in some ways because of the Cardinals are really seem poised to really do well this year, while the 49ers look like they might be taking a step back, but we'll see. Then, of course, you get to the Seattle Seahawks in terms of their data. The secondary has some work to do. They have great talent based on data. But they haven't really put it all together yet. So we'll still have to see what they do here. Then, of course, you get to the Kansas City Chiefs. Great defense in terms of the front seven, but the back half is a little bit in flux. So there will be opportunities to take advantage of this Kansas City Chiefs defense, but we'll just have to wait and see if these guys develop or not. But if they don't, Jalen Watson, Brian Cook are guys that I think they would be able to target, as well as Joshua Williams. So the secondary for the Chiefs, I think, is going to take a step back this year. Front seven is going to be really strong, but the secondary, I think, might get exposed. Then, of course, we get to the Dallas Cowboys in terms of what they bring to the table. Secondary wise, it's just a little meh. You know, the front seven has some really good players, but not the best overall team here in terms of defensively. And of course, you got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in terms of them. Great secondary here. Tyke Smith is a rookie, so there might be opportunities for Ricky Pearsall to kind of take advantage of some matchups here. But this could be a good game for the 49ers, but it is a pretty decent defense. Then, of course, you get to the Seattle Seahawks again. Similar sentiments. You know, there are some players that they could expose, but we'll have to see if they develop or not. You know, they have a chance to get better, but we'll have to see. And then, of course, you got the Green Bay Packers. They always have a really good secondary, but the front seven is not the best. So this might be an interesting game to watch as well. Then, of course, you got the Buffalo Bills. Their secondary has kind of regressed a lot in terms of data perspective here, and they have a rookie, of course, in Cole Bishop coming in. So this could be an opportunity for them to really do well against them as well, based on their secondary. The front seven is really good for the Bills, but when you take a look at the secondary, there are some opportunities that could be taken in that situation. Then you got the Bears. Great secondary, not so great front seven. We'll see how that kind of factors into things. But this could be opportunity for Pearsall also to have some good stuff against Kyler Gordon, or at least prove himself against Kyler Gordon, because he is a pretty good nickel corner. So that's going to be a good matchup to see. Then, of course, you got the Rams again. They might be a little bit more what you want them. The chemistry might be more in line. Like this might be what the defense is at this point in the season, in terms of matchups. You know, having all that experience, this could be kind of a later game matchup that might reveal what the Rams defense might look like in the future here. Then of course we get to the Miami Dolphins. Their linebacker situation is not the best, but again, when you look at the secondary and the front seven, they do have a lot of talent. So we'll see what happens here. But this could be an interesting matchup for them. Then of course you got Week 17 where they face the Detroit Lions. They have a revamped secondary here as well. Great talent in terms of their secondary, but they haven't quite put it all together yet. So we'll have to wait and see what happens here. And then, of course, you got the Arizona Cardinals to finish it out in Week 8, which this might be a game that decides who wins the NFC West. It really might, because the Cardinals had a really great draft, and they have the talent to, you know, be from worst to first in many ways. So we'll see what happens, but this is definitely an interesting situation here as well for them. Overall outlook for Ricky Pearsall. I am bearish on Ricky Pearsall in 2024. You know, that remains to be seen if he doesn't exactly succeed the way he needs to. But his floor in 2024, I would say, is 69.17 out of 100, with a 75.86 overall ceiling. And again, this is for his year one market share. So I'm not going to say he's going to be like Josh Dotson or OJ McDuffie or Matt Jones, even in terms of just being a bust. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he might have a season similar to Anthony Gonzalez or Calvin Ridley in year one in this particular offense. But I don't think that he has the talent to command the ball away from guys like Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, because he's not as talented as those players based on data. If he follows the trajectory of, say, Calvin Ridley, then he could break out in year three as a 90-plus percentile producer. However, that's a large ask. Even Ridley has failed to remain consistent after his initial breakout, which is another thing to kind of consider here. So, you know, the blueprint for what you want Pearsall to be is like a Calvin Ridley, but even Calvin Ridley, blueprint-wise, is more so an outlier. So you're kind of betting on Pearsall being something that doesn't quite happen that often in the NFL. Could it happen? Absolutely. But I think I would take my chances drafting other wide receivers over Pearsall in terms of rookie drafts, because they have more talent. They're in a slightly better situation. And again, the data isn't quite as risky. I showed you the data. I showed you all the players he compared to in this video. If you want to go back and look at them, you can. And that those are just the risks. The risks don't really meet the rewards to me in terms of what you get. So we'll see what happens, but that's my general sentiment on him based on data. So with all this stuff out of the way, thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Jim Coburn. You can check out my other work at patreon.com/jcoburn. Also check out my X, formerly known as Twitter account at Jimmetrics, where I have tweets and stuff like that. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.